Listen, I'm going to tell you about one of the most frustrating missions I ever ran, and that's saying something because I've had my share of dry holes and blown operations, but this one still irks the hell out of me to this day. We're talking about the 80s here, the middle of the 80s when the Cold War was still hot, when the Soviets were running the most sophisticated biological weapons program the world had ever seen. And we knew they were violating every damn treaty they'd signed, but proving it, that was a whole different story. The target was a place called Steppnagorsk, Kazakhstan, middle of nowhere, middle of absolutely nowhere. 10 kilometers outside a closed city in the Kazakh steppe, surrounded by flat, open terrain for hundreds of miles in every direction. The Soviets had this civilian cover organization called Biopreparat, supposedly managing legitimate biotechnology research across 40 to 50 facilities throughout the USSR, all of them supposedly doing peaceful work, all of them actually developing anthrax plague, smallpox, tularemia, Marburg, and God knows what else, into weaponized agents that could wipe out entire cities. Steppnagorsk was one of the crown jewels, built in 1982 right after the Sverdlovsk accident, when 70 people died from an accidental anthrax release, and the Soviets needed a backup production facility. This place wasn't some small research lab. This was designed for industrial-scale mobilization production. 300 tons of weaponized anthrax per year. 300 tons. That's enough to kill every human being on the planet several times over. They had it down to a 3-day production cycle, 1.5 tons of bacteria every 72 hours. Assembly lines for bombs and warheads. Specialized fermentation equipment. Underground bunkers. The works. And they put a guy named Konachin Alabakov in charge. Colonel. Smart as hell. He'd go on to defect years later, take the name Ken Alabek and tell us everything, but back in '86 when I got the mission, he was still loyal, still Soviet, still cranking out anthrax 836, a strain 3 times more powerful than anything produced at Sverdlovsk. 5 kilograms of that stuff could infect half the people in a square kilometer. 5 kilograms. You could carry that in a backpack. I got tasked with getting close, getting photographs, getting proof. The agency had satellite imagery, they had signals intelligence, they had defector reports, but they didn't have ground truth. They needed eyes on target. They needed documentation that would hold up, that couldn't be dismissed as Western propaganda. That's what you do. Volunteer for everything they come up. Don't turn anything down, because what you may turn down, it sounds insignificant, may turn out to be the best thing going. And this was clearly not insignificant. This was the kind of mission that could change international policy, that could force the Soviets to admit their violations, that could save millions of lives if we could expose what they were doing. The briefing officer in Ankara laid it out plain. We need close-up photographs, security measures, personnel, vehicle traffic, construction details, everything you can document. I told him I'd go. That's it. Simple. When's the insertion? He looked at me, looked at my file. I was already past 60 by then, technically retired from SF, technically just doing contractor work. You understand this is a denied area operation, Soviet territory, closed city, biological weapons facility. If you're compromised, there's no extraction, no acknowledgement, nothing. I understood. That's the job. That's what you sign up for when you're a warrior, when you wish to be involved, period. You don't get to pick the easy missions and turn down the hard ones. You volunteer for everything and you figure it out as you go. Getting into Kazakhstan wasn't the problem. I came in through Tajikistan using documentation that identified me as a mineral survey consultant for a European firm. Good cover, decent papers. Enough to get me through the external borders and into the Central Asian republics without raising flags. But getting anywhere near Steppnagorsk, that was different. The Soviets knew The West was trying to gather intelligence on their bioweapons facilities, so they'd built them in the most isolated, godforsaken locations they could find, and they'd wrapped them in layers of security that extended for miles. Steppnagorsk was a closed city. You couldn't just drive there. Internal checkpoints everywhere. Travel permits required. Local militia trained to report anything unusual. And the facility itself was 10 kilometers outside the city, surrounded by restricted zones, monitored by observation posts, helicopter patrols, vehicle patrols, radio intercepts, the works. The KGB coordinated security measures with local Soviet authorities, with military units, with the facility's own security force. Everything was integrated. Everything was monitored. I linked up with my local contact in a small town about 150 miles south of the target. He was an ethnic Russian mid-50s who'd spent 30 years surveying agricultural land and uranium deposits in the region. Good man. Very, very good. He'd worked with Western intelligence before, knew how to keep his mouth shut, knew the terrain, knew the roads, knew where the security checkpoints were positioned, and more importantly, when they changed shifts, when they got lazy, when they could be avoided. We met in the back room of a tea house just after dark. He didn't waste time. "You cannot drive to Steppnagorsk," he said in Russian. "The checkpoints will stop you. They verify papers, they call Moscow, they check lists. Even with good documentation, you will be detained for questioning." "What about bypassing the checkpoints?" He shook his head. "The roads are monitored. Vehicle traffic is logged. If you leave one checkpoint and don't arrive at the next, they send patrols to find you. And off-road?" He laughed. Not a happy laugh. "The steppe is flat, open, no cover. They see everything. Helicopters, observation posts, border guard units. You drive off-road in a vehicle, they spot you in 15 minutes. So I walk." He looked at me like I was insane. "Walk? You understand the distances? 100 kilometers across open ground. No trees, no rocks, no depressions, just flat steppe. And you are American. If locals see you, they report you. If patrols spot you, they investigate. If border guards find you, you disappear." I understood the risks. Hell, the risks were the whole reason they sent me instead of some analyst from Langley. But here's what I'd learned over 3 decades in SF, over years in SOG running missions, in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam. The enemy sets up security based on what they think you'll do. They watch the roads because that's how normal people travel. They monitor vehicle traffic because that's how threats usually approach. But if you're willing to do what they think is impossible, if you're willing to walk 100 kilometers across hostile terrain, if you're willing to accept risk that normal people won't accept you, create opportunities that shouldn't exist. "Can you get me within 30 kilometers? He thought about it. "Maybe. There are back roads, dirt tracks used by shepherds. No official checkpoints, but also no reason for traffic. If we're seen, we'll be stopped. Then we don't get seen." He pulled out a map, Soviet military topographic map, 1 to 50,000 scale, the kind you're not supposed to have. He pointed to a spot about 30 kilometers south of Steppnagorsk. "There is a security patrol area here, observation towers, regular vehicle patrols. I can get you this far using back roads. After that, you're on foot, 30 kilometers, about 18 miles. A long walk, especially across open ground, especially when you're trying to stay undetected, especially when you're 60 years old and carrying camera equipment and water and emergency gear. But 18 miles isn't impossible. I'd covered more than that in worse terrain. In Vietnam, moving at night through triple canopy jungle. The steppe would be different, flat and exposed, but at least I could see threats coming." "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow night, after dark. We drive without lights. We avoid the main roads. If we're stopped, we say we're going to check on sheep herds to the south. It's plausible enough. I spent the next day preparing. Checked my gear. Camera with telephoto lens, high-speed film 12 rolls, compass, water bottles 4 liters, emergency rations, dark clothing, soft-soled boots, Small folding shovel in case I needed to dig a hide position. Knife. No firearm. If I got into a firefight on Soviet territory, I was done anyway. A weapon would just give them an excuse to shoot me on sight. The local contact, whose name I never learned and didn't need to know, had one more piece of advice. The patrols change shifts at 2 o'clock in the morning. There is a gap. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe 45. That's when you move. 2 o'clock. Change of shift. The 5-hour window, that principle had served me well in Vietnam. Your opponent doesn't like to work at night, which gives you the upper hand. But the Soviets weren't Viet Cong. The Soviets maintained professional security discipline around strategic assets. Still, shift changes are shift changes. Human nature is human nature. There's always a gap, always a moment of reduced alertness when the old crew is tired and the new crew is still waking up. We left just before midnight. The steppe at night is eerie as hell. No trees, no landmarks, no lights, just flat emptiness stretching to the horizon under a quarter moon. We drove without headlights, using the moonlight and the stars to navigate. The dirt track was barely visible, 2 ruts through the grass that could have been made by shepherds or smugglers or military patrols. My contact drove slowly, maybe 20 kilometers per hour, feeling for the track, avoiding any sudden movements that might create dust or noise. I kept watch, scanning the horizon for lights, for movement, for any sign of patrols. The steppe was cold this time of year, late April, and my breath was visible in the cab. That worried me. If the Soviets had infrared surveillance, thermal imaging, anything modern, I'd light up like a beacon. But there was nothing I could do about that. You control what you can control and accept what you can't. We drove for 2 hours. Slow going. The track wound around small depressions, skirted areas of soft ground that might bog down a vehicle. At one point, my contact stopped, suddenly killed the engine. Listen. I listened. Nothing. Just wind. Just the creaking of the cooling engine. Vehicle, he said. To the north. Maybe 5 kilometers. I rolled down the window. There. Faint. The sound of a diesel engine. Patrol vehicle, probably. Or a truck heading to the facility. Hard to tell direction with the wind, but it was definitely north of us. Definitely moving. We waited 10 minutes. The sound faded. My contact started the engine and we kept moving. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, we reached his limit. He pulled into a shallow depression, barely deep enough to conceal the vehicle, and shut off the engine. This is as far as I go. 32 kilometers to the facility. Maybe 33. North-northeast. Follow the compass bearing. Stay low. If you see patrols, get flat and don't move. I got out, took my pack, checked my compass. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, just a hint, just enough to know that dawn was 3 hours away. When do you leave? Now. I can't stay here. If patrols find the vehicle, they'll search the area. You have until tomorrow night. Same time, same place. If you're not here, I wait 30 minutes and I leave. I understood. He had to protect himself, had to maintain his cover. 24 hours. That gave me time to approach the facility, observe, photograph, and walk back. Tight schedule, but doable. He looked at me one more time. Americans, he said, you do such stupid things. Jogging is stupid. Walking across the steppe is stupid. But maybe because it's stupid, it works. He drove south without lights and disappeared into the darkness. I started walking north. 30 kilometers is about 18 miles. On a road with good terrain, you can cover that in 4 hours. Easy. Across open, hostile ground, where every step might be observed, where you're constantly scanning for threats, where you're using terrain features that barely exist to mask your movement. It takes longer, much longer. I moved in a low crouch, not quite crawling, not quite walking, something in between that keeps your profile down but still covers ground. Every 100 meters I stopped, dropped flat, scanned 360. Listen, the steppe was quiet this time of night, just wind and the occasional distant sound of a vehicle or a dog barking from some settlement miles away. The terrain was worse than I'd expected. Flat, yes, but not pool table flat. There were small rises, small depressions, patches of rocky ground, areas of soft alkaline soil that crunched under my boots. No real cover, nothing you could hide behind, but enough micro-terrain to use if you understood how. I aimed for the low spots, the depressions, the areas where the grass was thicker, where I could blend into the ground if I needed to. By 3 o'clock, I'd covered maybe 5 kilometers. Too slow. At this rate, I wouldn't reach visual range of the facility until mid-morning, and by then the sun would be up, the patrols would be active, and I'd be completely exposed. I needed to move faster, but moving faster meant taking risks, meant accepting more exposure, meant trusting that the Soviets weren't watching every square meter of steppe with infrared cameras. I picked up the pace, still low, still using the terrain, but moving steadily. The temperature was dropping, my breath coming in white puffs that dissipated in the wind. I forced myself to breathe through my nose to minimize the vapor cloud. Small things, details. That's what keeps you alive. Around 4 o'clock, I heard the helicopter. It came from the north, flying low, maybe 200 feet above the steppe. Mi-8 transport helicopter. Distinctive sound, you can't mistake it. I dropped flat, pressed myself into a small depression that was barely 6 inches deep and froze. Didn't move. Didn't breathe heavy. Just stayed absolutely still. The helicopter was running a search pattern, not directly overhead, but close, maybe a kilometer to the west. I could see the searchlight sweeping the ground back and forth, methodical. Were they looking for me, or was this routine patrol? Impossible to know. Either way, if that light hit me, if they had thermal imaging, if they spotted any movement, I was done. The helicopter passed, continued south, didn't circle back. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes listening to the sound fade, then I got up and kept moving. By 5 o'clock, I'd covered maybe 12 kilometers, halfway. The sky was lightening faster now, the stars fading the horizon, turning from black to dark blue. Dawn was coming. I had maybe 45 minutes before the sun broke the horizon and I lost the cover of darkness. I pushed harder. Faster movement, less caution, accepting more risk because time was running out. The ground started rising slightly, not a hill, not even a slope, just a gentle rise. That meant I was approaching the facility's security zone. I could see lights in the distance, not many. Just a few points of illumination that marked the observation towers, the facility perimeter, maybe a guard post. At 5:30, with the sky turning pink in the east, I found a depression slightly deeper than the others, maybe 2 feet at the deepest point, and I set up my position. I was approximately 4 kilometers from the facility. Not close, not nearly as close as I needed to be. But the sun was coming up, and moving any farther in daylight across open ground was suicide. I pulled out my camera, set up the telephoto lens, and waited. As the sun came up, I could see the facility clearly. Buildings, industrial structures, ventilation stacks that rose 30 meters into the air, guard towers at regular intervals along the perimeter fence, vehicle traffic moving between buildings, personnel, tiny figures at this distance, moving with purpose from one structure to another. Through the telephoto lens, I could make out more details. The main production building was massive, 3 or 4 stories tall with no windows, just solid concrete walls and a flat roof covered with ventilation equipment. That would be building 221, where the fermentation happened, where they grew the anthrax in huge vats before processing it into weapons-grade powder. Next to it, a smaller structure, probably building 211, where they prepared the growth media, the nutrients, the chemicals that fed the bacteria. I took photographs, lots of photographs. Different angles, different exposures, different focal lengths. Write record, listen, take photographs. That's the mandate. That's what separates operators from tourists. Even if the intelligence value was marginal, I was documenting everything because you never know what detail might corroborate other sources, might reveal a pattern, might prove a violation years later when defectors started talking. But I knew it wasn't enough. The briefing officer had said close-up photographs. This wasn't close-up. This was standoff surveillance from 4,000 meters. I could document the layout, the general structures, the vehicle traffic patterns, but I couldn't read signs, couldn't identify faces, couldn't capture the specific technical details that would prove this was a bioweapons facility and not just a pesticide plant. I needed to get closer, at least 2 kilometers closer, maybe 1,500 meters from the perimeter. That would give me clean shots of the security measures, the personnel, the equipment being moved between buildings. I waited, watching the patrol patterns. The guards changed at 6 o'clock. I could see vehicles moving along the perimeter road, regular intervals, maybe every 20 minutes. Observation towers had at least 2 guards each scanning with binoculars. Smart security, professional. This wasn't some half-assed perimeter with lazy guards. This was a strategic facility protected by people who took their job seriously. At 7 o'clock, I made my decision. I was going to move closer. Not now, not in full daylight, but tonight after dark. I'd stay in this position all day, photograph what I could, observe the patterns, wait for sunset, and then move another 2 kilometers closer. Set up a new position, photograph through the night, then extract before dawn and walk back to the pickup point. It was a good plan. It might have worked, but at 7:30, the patrol pattern changed. A vehicle left the facility heading south. UAZ 469, military jeep, probably carrying security personnel. It wasn't following the perimeter road. It was heading into the steppe, heading in my general direction. I pressed flat into the depression. The vehicle was maybe 3 kilometers away, too far to spot me visually, but close enough that if they had specific information, if someone had reported something, if the helicopter had logged an infrared signature and they were investigating, I was about to have a very bad day. The vehicle stopped about 1 kilometer from my position. 2 men got out. I could see them through the telephoto lens scanning the area with binoculars. One of them had a radio. They were coordinating with someone, the observation towers maybe, or the helicopter, or central security. They stood there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just watching, just scanning, not coming closer, but not leaving either. Then the helicopter came back. It came from the north again, same MI8, same search pattern, but this time it wasn't random patrol. This time it was coordinated with the ground unit. The helicopter flew a grid pattern over the area where I'd been moving earlier, where I'd crossed during the night. They were backtracking. They were looking for something specific. Had they seen me? Had thermal imaging picked up my movement? Had a shepherd reported seeing someone? Impossible to know. But they were searching and they were getting closer, and I was lying in a depression that was barely 2 feet deep in the middle of open steppe with nowhere to run, no way to fight. The helicopter moved closer. 500 meters, 400, I could see the door gunner leaning out, scanning the ground with optics. The ground unit had moved too, now driving slowly, scanning with binoculars, stopping every 100 meters to glass the terrain. This was it. This was compromise. I was about to be discovered, arrested, interrogated, and disappeared into some KGB cell. The mission was blown. All I could do was stay flat, stay still, and hope they missed me, hope their search wasn't thorough enough, hope they got tired and went back to base. The helicopter passed 200 meters to my west, close enough that I could feel the rotor wash, close enough that dust and grass were blowing across my position. The ground unit was 300 meters south, scanning north, scanning directly toward my position. I didn't move, didn't breathe heavy, just pressed my face into the dirt and waited. The helicopter continued its grid pattern, north, then east, then north again. The ground unit stopped scanning, turned around, drove back toward the facility. After 30 minutes, the helicopter departed, heading back north. They hadn't seen me. Pure luck. Maybe the depression was deep enough. Maybe the angle was wrong. Maybe they were looking for something else entirely. Doesn't matter. I was still here, still undetected, but the window was closed. I couldn't stay. I couldn't move closer. The security was too tight. The search is too thorough. Any further movement would get me caught. I stayed in that depression until sunset. 8 hours, lying prone in the dirt, photographing what I could, observing the patrol patterns, documenting the facility from 4 kilometers away. Not close enough. Not nearly close enough. But it was all I could get. When the sun set, when darkness covered the steppe, I packed my gear and started walking south, 18 miles back. Same terrain, same risks, same exposure, but now I was exhausted, dehydrated, and running on nerves. I moved fast, faster than I should have, accepting risk, because I needed to make the pickup point before my contact left. Around midnight, I ran out of water. That was a problem. The steppe in late April is cold at night, but dehydration hits regardless. I could feel my mouth getting sticky, my tongue swelling, my thought processes slowing. You don't survive decades of unconventional warfare by panicking. You survive by controlling your reactions, by staying disciplined, by trusting your training. I forced myself to maintain pace, forced myself to keep moving, forced myself to navigate by compass bearing, because when you're dehydrated, when you're exhausted, your judgment goes first. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I was hallucinating. Not full-blown seeing things that aren't there, but peripheral movement, shadows that might be patrols, might be nothing. Every sound was amplified. Every rustle of grass was a threat. Every distant light was a searchlight. That's when you know you're in trouble. That's when you have to lock down, focus on the basics, compass bearing, pace count, breathing. I reached the pickup point just before 3 o'clock. My contact was there waiting, engine running. He took one look at me and handed me a bottle of water. I drank half of it in 30 seconds. You get photographs? Yeah. They good? I didn't answer. We drove south in silence. Back at the safe house, I developed the film. Old school process chemicals and darkroom work, no digital, no instant preview, just the slow reveal of images emerging from the developer bath. I laid the prints out on the table and examined them one by one, knowing what I'd find, knowing it wasn't enough. Buildings at distance. Guard towers as small rectangles. Perimeter fence barely visible. Personnel as dots. No close-ups, no identifying details. No technical specifications. No proof that this facility was producing 300 tons of weaponized anthrax per year. Just structures in the distance that could be anything. I wrote my report. Documented everything, the approach route, the terrain, the security measures, the near compromise, the limitations. I included the photographs with detailed annotations, explaining what each image showed, and more importantly, what it didn't show. I concluded that ground penetration was not feasible with current resources, that close-range photography required either aerial reconnaissance or HUMINT from inside the facility. The report went up through channels. I never got a response. But here's what I learned later, years later, after Ken Alabek defected in '92 after he started talking. Everything we suspected was true. Steppnagorsk could produce 300 tons of anthrax annually. The strain they developed, anthrax 836, was 3 times more powerful than Sverdlov's strain. 5 kilograms could infect half a square kilometer. They had assembly lines, production schedules, mobilization plans, and we couldn't get close enough to photograph any of it. That bothers me still, not because I failed personally, but because I knew what was happening in that facility and I couldn't stop it, couldn't expose it, couldn't get the proof. Sometimes you do everything right and the mission still fails. Sometimes the enemy's security is too good, the terrain too hostile, the risk too high. Knowing when you're beaten isn't quitting, it's operational realism, and you live to fight another day. The agency kept working the problem. They recruited defectors, improved satellite reconnaissance, developed new collection methods. Eventually they got proof. It took years, but they got there. The Soviet bioweapons program got exposed not from one operation, but from dozens of missions over decades, hundreds of people taking risks, documenting what they could, contributing pieces until the truth became undeniable. I contributed one piece 18 miles across hostile ground, 4,000 meters from target, and photographs that didn't prove much, but it was my piece. And when you add it to everyone else's pieces, the picture becomes clear. That's how intelligence work actually happens. Not dramatic victories, just persistent, incremental, unglamorous effort. Most missions are like Steppnagorsk, long walks, insufficient evidence, frustrating limitations, but you do them anyway. You volunteer anyway. You document what you can anyway, because every piece matters. Sometimes you can't get close, but you keep trying anyway. That's it.